Good morning. So we continue our review of the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis. We're reviewing the essay I wrote that collects together all the questions and unfinished topics and proposes, based on the source material of Maimer HaMagbil L'Sheves, primarily from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, what would most likely have been the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis. So we're going through this actual essay that I wrote. Let me look it up. Just a moment. Let me pull it up. Here we are. So we are, I believe, on page 17, this essay. And we're in the middle of understanding what is Torah Ohr. Keep in mind, just the organization of the essay can be very helpful. Chapter 1 addressed firstly a summary of the whole Hemshech Ayin Beis, but addressed primarily where the Ayin Beis concluded was with his bonanus, the contemplation on the three levels of divine unity, Yichud Tata, Yichud Ilah, and the Yichud of both Yichudim. And chapter 1 in the essay continues and says what would have come next would have been the effect that contemplation has on the animal soul, that it too should be participate in Avos Hashem, V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, that follows Shema. Chapter 2 of the essay addressed Ner Mitzvah, that's Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the flame or the candle, the lamp, that is the neshama, and its effect on the animal soul. But then comes Ner Mitzvah, is also compared to a lamp, a candle. So chapter 2 of the essay discussed that. We did that at length. Now we're in chapter 3 of the essay discussing the next part of the verse, Torah Ohr. And as I pointed out yesterday and a number of times, this is actually the central theme of the end of Ayin Beis, starting from page 1350. After the 550 and some pages about the Avedim Matlamayel, the interface between divine and existence of the neshama through tefillah, Shema, now comes the Aveda through Torah, Hamshachim Amayel Lamata, which is Torah Ohr. And exactly as right as he cited from Hamagbil L'Sheves, Torah Ohr, as the Alter Rebbe actually used the very language, that is exact language of the Alter Rebbe, like we read in the beginning of this chapter 3 in the essay. The exact language is this: Torah Ohr, hu hamshachas ein seif baruch hu mamayla lamata. That's the Alter Rebbe's language in Torah Ohr. So we reviewed what that is. Ohr Atzmi. It is a Ohr that comes from above. It is a Ohr from higher than Ishtalshlus, pre-Tzimtzum, with the Kavanah, the Tachlis HaAdam, the Tachlis Brias HaAdam, the purpose of existence is not that just existence should just exist or be aligned with godliness, but existence should experience pre-existence reality consciousness, pre-Tzimtzum consciousness. And how is that done? Through Torah. Because Torah comes from that place. Torah comes undiluted, not affected by the Tzimtzum, like he explained, because Torah is a pre-Tzimtzum Ohr, an Ohr Atzmi. Pnimi is ve'atzmus ha'Ohr, as he put it. And we moved on, we're already on page 16, we learned, and 17, where we're up to now, from the Maimer, from the Mittler Rebbe. That's Pnimi is atzmus ha'Ohr. And as such, as he said, because of its bittul, that was the final point. What is the reason that Torah has this power to draw down energy that is unfiltered, a pre-Tzimtzum energy, meaning pre the Tzimtzum is because it has it's fundamentally Chochma is koyach ma, and ma is bittul. When you have bittul, it's transparent. There's nothing that's in between that adds or subtracts anything from the Ohr. You're getting the Ohr exactly as it is, kamoshahu, as he put it, like a funnel, without any shift or change. Whereas the Ohr that goes through the Tzimtzum is the Ohr that goes into Ishtalshelus, that's subject, obviously, to filters that define existence. but Torah remains constantly, always Torah Ohr, the Torah of Hashem. It never changes that personality, even as it comes down post-Tzimtzum. Now, a few more details in this summary. Mittler Rebbe asked the question that from the Pasuk, Ner mitzvah v'Torah Ohr, it's mashma, when you read it literally, that a mitzvah is only a candle. And the light that it produces is Torah Ohr. That's what's mashma. Even though he did give another interpretation where he said earlier that it is more correct to say that the Ner mitzvah also has Ohr, but he's going back to this basic interpretation and says and asks a fundamental question. Many places we find that mitzvahs actually are superior to Torah, because the Maisa Ikar, not Medrash, Dir b'tachtenim, the action. And as great as Torah is, mitzvahs have something that Torah doesn't have. So how is that consistent, he asks, with a statement that mitzvahs without Ohr, Torah Ohr, it's nothing. Think of a candle that was never lit. So that's a question he has not answered yet, but he's building it up, and he began to explain there are two levels of Ohr. Ohr before that is Ohr that is affected by the Tzimtzum and travels through the Choshech into the existence at post Tzimtzum, and there's an Ohr that remains an Ohr before the Tzimtzum. And now going back to Torah, clearly he wants to say that Torah is that higher level, or maybe both levels, but also that higher level. And that's what we're in the middle of, understanding that. So we're on page 17. The last thing we learned was, I think, the third paragraph, the Sheresh Hatam, like I said. What is the reason that Torah retains that purity of Torah Ohr that's not affected by the Tzimtzum? Because of its bittul. That's a key last point that he made now. Okay. So with the third, so three paragraphs. So we're going to read now the fourth paragraph on page 17 of this essay that I wrote. Now let's remember again the question that's still the question that's still not answered is, how do we explain mitzvah and Torah, ner mitzvah and Torah Ohr? Where on one hand you say the mitzvah is only a ner, a candle, and Torah is light. On the other hand, mitzvahs have tremendous power, and many ways are superior to Torah, because the main thing is bringing it down into action. So he's now going to begin to address that question, but the Mittler Rebbe style, he doesn't answer it. He's just going to negate a possible answer that you may say based on what we just learned. Based on what we just learned about Torah Ohr and the two levels of Ohr, perhaps we could answer this question. But the Mittler Rebbe is going to say, he's going to suggest an answer, but he's going to negate it and go further into the topic before he actually gets back to the answer. So paragraph number 4 on page 17, he says like this. So the last line of the previous paragraph was what? That we're talking about Torah's Chochma koyachma bittul. Let me just get this clear here. 1 second. Yeah, and that's why I should add, that's why Torah Ohr reveals all the deepest secrets, because before Hashem, the Tzimtzum doesn't have an effect. So if Torah is a so-called package, lack of a better word, Torah is an undiluted reflection of pure Atzmi Sa'ir Ein Sof, so it also reflects all the deepest things, the Amukes, Minei Cheshech, Amuk of Amuk Minei Cheshech, even those depths that are concealed because of the Tzimtzum. Because before that level, there is no Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum does not have an effect, I should say. There is a Tzimtzum, but an Imdover master klal. Okay, that was the last thing we learned. Alafon of Nigla Koloela. Al Pizem, move on. And there I'm continuing inside paragraph 4, page 17. According to this, is move on. She'ein letaras kushya de le'il. You would think you could answer the question we asked earlier about how do you reconcile mitzvah and Torah. That on one hand, the pasuk seems to suggest that a mitzvah is, I don't want to say the word inferior, but less than Torah. And actually, Torah is Ohr, and mitzvah is only Ner. So, according to what we just learned, you can't answer the kasha as follows. What was the kasha? Lama nikra mitzvahs b'shem ner b'loy Ohr klal. Why does the pasuk say ner mitzvah, which seems to suggest that it's only a candle that's not yet lit, meaning there's no light yet? Im ein meir de Torah. So why is it called ner? If there's no Torah yet, it's only a ner. Canal. Ma'achar sham mitzvah shoshim be'etzem haratzon shelamayla min ha'chochma legamri canal. Being that the mitzvahs are rooted in the etzem haratzon, like we learned, in the very core desire, which is even higher than chochma of Torah, it's higher than chochma legamri, and yet we call it only ner mitzvah, as if without Torah there's no The imipnei. So here's the possible answer, the hypothetical answer. The imipnei shalafi hanal bepirish v'Torah zeu Ohr Atzmi the Ensof. So maybe you could answer, seemingly you may want to answer, that we just learned, that's true, the lower level of Torah may be lower than mitzvahs. But if you're talking about Torah in its purest form, it's an air that's not affected by the Tzimtzum. It's exactly the Ohr Atzmi as it is before the Tzimtzum. Ohr Atzmi is the Ein Sof Shamayla Gam Min HaRatzon Elyon. And as such, it's higher even than the Ratzon Elyon of mitzvahs. Sheba mitzvahs. She'ein Beis Shinei Mahus Klal. Because the Torah, like we learned, is not subject to any change. Because of its bittul and its chochma, it retains its very essential Ohr personality as pre-Tzimtzum, and as such, it's not affected by the Tzimtzum at all. So maybe that's the answer. That's why it's higher than mitzvahs. Because a mitzvah, at the end of the day, does come down into the Gashmizdika world. So yes, it's God's Ratzon. So Ratzon in general is higher than Chochma. But Torah has an element that mitzvahs doesn't have, that it has the Ohr. It has the revelation of the divine energy that is undiluted and unfiltered for the reasons we just discussed. So that would seem to be that after we understand the greatness of Torah, maybe that's why Torah is called Torah Ohr, and mitzvahs are not called Ohr, because they don't have that element. They don't retain the Gilui Ohr Ein Sof as well as Torah does. They are God's Ratzon, but Ratzon could also be concealed. It doesn't mean it's revealed. When you do a mitzvah, it doesn't mean you are necessarily you're fulfilling God's will at a very high level, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are experiencing it in a revealed and conscious fashion. But the Mettler Rebbe negates that. But because mitzvahs too are rooted in Atzmus, in the Ohr Atzmus of Ein Sof. V'nikra tarach amudei Ohr, and as we learned earlier, they're called the 620 pillars of light, Ohr. That's what mitzvahs are. 620 refers to the 613 mitzvahs and the 7 mitzvahs of the Rabbanan, without just the mitzvahs themselves, and they're called Ohr, amudei Ohr, ki yadua. So therefore, v'im kain, this is what I'm writing. That's the quote from the Mittler Rebbe. In kain hodr kushi leduchte. So the initial question returns, mahi hamayla b'teira legabe mitzvahs. What is indeed the advantage of Torah over mitzvahs? That Torah is called Ohr and mitzvahs are only called ner. And this is from page 409 in the Mittler Rebbe if you want to look inside. So bottom line is, while he's discussing the whole beauty and power of Torah, the Mittler Rebbe goes back to his initial question and makes it clear that based on what we just said about Torah, you can't use that. It's not good enough to answer the initial question why it's called Torah Ohr, because mitzvahs are also called Ohr, Tarach Amudei Ohr, and they're also rooted in the highest level. So we still need an answer to the question why dafke Torah Ohr and mitzvah is called ner. And the Mittler Rebbe is now going to continue to explain the idea. Let me stop if anyone has any questions on this paragraph that I just read. Okay. Now the Mittler Rebbe continues. And this he explains, again, when you don't see a quote, quotation marks, it means it's my language, and I'm summing up and connecting the points. And when I quote directly from the Mittler Rebbe, I'll either write V'zeh l'shenei, This is his language. This is an actual citation, or put it in quotation marks. And to explain this, the Mittler Rebbe explains, that the Chochma of Torah itself, there are two types of light. So earlier he said there are two types of light, one that enters and is affected by Cheshech, and one that's not. And he made it clear, Torah is the second level. Torah is an Ohr that is not affected by the Tzimtzum and the Cheshech. So that's one thing. But now he's saying in the Chochma of Torah itself, there's also two levels of Ohr. Even in the Chochma that, and Ayin Beis that radiate two different levels of darkness. So now he's introducing not only there are two levels of Ohr, there's also two levels of darkness. And we'll soon understand what that means. And what are the two levels? Torah shebiksav, the written Torah, shesharshei, and quote. Here it's a direct quote. The root of Torah the written Torah, is ba'er, is sharshei, the root of it, is Ohr Atzmi, is the Ein Sof mamish. It's rooted in the very core of Ein Sof, the Ohr of the very core of Ein Sof mamish. Begdushas ha'atzmus the Ein Sof, upnimius atzmus chochma v'ritzene. So that's the highest level, that is rooted in kedushas ha'atzmus of Ein Sof. The very kedusha would mean sanctity or holiness, but here he means havdalah, completely removed. Atzmus Ein Sof is completely removed from existence. Uprimius atzmus chochma v'ritzene, and the inner dimension and the core dimension of his wisdom and his ratzon. So let me just explain. In Tanya, you find this expression as well: chitzenius chochma, or chitzenius ratzon, and primius ratzon. So the classic example given for this, just to explain it for a moment, is when you desire something, it doesn't always mean that what you want is the end result. Your ratzon could be for the means to get to something else that you are aspiring to. For example, you want to build a home for your family. What is the real ratzon pnimi and atzmi? To have a beautiful home where your family is comfortable and they can live in a loving and nurturing environment, and you could have Torah there and davening there and have a Shabbos, have guests, and everything that a home represents. But in order to build a home, you can't just say, I want a home. You have to have a desire prior to that, and that's called chitzenius haratzon, that you're going to now hire an architect, a contractor, and they in turn also have a ratzon that they will hire all kinds of workers, and each of them has a desire to make parnasa. So you have a ratzon that is the ultimate. If someone says, why do you want a home? The pnimius and atzmus is for my family, and even that is in order to make a mishkan for Hashem in this world. But the chitzenius haratzon is necessary because it's a means to an end. But there's still a ratzon there, because there's no way you're going to have a home if you don't plan and strategize and desire to bring the right contractors, and that requires you getting immersed in that. It's not going to just happen. So when God created the world, the same is correct. Same is true. The first 6 days he created the world, and if you asked Hashem, why are you creating this world? You want to have a sun and a moon? You want to have animals, birds, fish? You want to have vegetation? You want to have a heaven? You want light? These are all the creations of the first 6 days. The answer is no. I want a dira b'tachtenim. I want to have a home in the lowest of worlds. And I want the human being who will be a neshama beguf that will come into this world. I will endow it and bestow it with power and resources to be able to make that dira. But I have to have tachtenim first. I have to have a house. So I'm going to build a house. Day 1, day 2, day 3, every day. Part of the world is created until 6 days. You have a beautiful world. What is the Ratzon Hashem? Chitzenius Ratzon is the world. Pnimius Ratzon is the Adam, the human being, the special guest that comes at the end of creation. And the Torah and mitzvahs that are given to this human being, that's my Ratzon Pnimi. To transform the world into what I want to be of it. So the same is true, frankly, you can apply this in secular language to a business plan. You make a business plan, first you have to say, what is the objective? What is the ultimate goal of this company? That's the previous dikarotzen. Then to get there, we need to have a bunch of levels of retzenis, different desires, and different plans and strategies how to get there. And that's all part of the plan. And you have people who are invested in that. As a matter of fact, some people, it's not relevant to them, the deeper kavanah. I mean, it's really relevant to everyone in this case, because all of us are created in this world. But technically speaking, there are people who are, their job is to oversee, to make sure that the mission of the company is fulfilled. The previous sarotz. So in that context, you can understand a lot better this language that the Mittler Rebbe is using here. So let's go back again. So he says that Torah Shebiksav is rooted in Atzmis Ein Sof Mamish Kedusha Atzmis Ein Sof, but Primis Atzmis Chochma V'Ritzeinei. So if you look at God's wisdom in this world, it's beautiful wisdom. Look at the design. Look at the unbelievable, fantastic, and extraordinary wisdom that went into every part of existence. But is that Primis Chochma or that's Chochma? So that's Chochma of Hashem. The Primis is why He created it. What's the purpose behind it all? So where do you find that in Torah and in Torah itself, in Torah Shebiksav? That's why Torah is called the blueprint of existence. The blueprint tells you the whole blueprint of it all, not just what pieces go where. It's not just the geographical and technical and mechanical details. It's the inner meaning of it all, the inner soul, if you wish, of it all. The Chochma law, the Torah Hakdesha, and this is the supernal higher light or higher energy of supernal Chochma law of Hashem in the holy Torah, Torah Hakdesha, Shu B'chinas Eitz HaChaim. This is called the tree of life. Shelamayla harbe me'etz hadas. That's far much higher than the tree of knowledge, and I'll explain that in a moment as well. That's an end quote. So this is actual quote from the Mittler Rebbe to explain what he's saying. Two levels of Ohr in Torah itself. In the Atzmis of Ohr, there's two levels. There's Torah Shebiksav, and we'll soon learn Torah Shebal Peh. So what is Eitz Chaim and Eitz Hadas? So Eitz Chaim, Eitz Hadas, of course, the two trees that Hashem planted, God planted in the Garden of Eden, and told Adam and Chava, from the Eitz Chaim you should eat, you can eat, from the Eitz Hadas you should not. And unfortunately they did. And that changed all of existence till this day. What is the fundamental difference in Eitz Chaim and Eitz Hadas? And why is this called Chaim and this is called Das? So there are various explanations. I'll just give one of the basics. Eitz Chaim, we say Torah, we say is Eitz Chaim Hi, tree of life. We say it all the time. Eitz Chaim Hi l'machzikim ba, the tree of life to those that hold on to it. Because Torah is Torah's Chaim. As I said, the blueprint for life, Torah is Chayenu v'Orech Yameinu. It gives us life and sustenance, like we say every evening in Ma'ariv. It's our oxygen. It's our water. Rabbi Akiva, when he was asked by the philosopher, why do Jews can't go a few days without water? He said, because just like a fish cannot exist without water, a Jew can't exist without Torah. Torah is our very sustenance. Why is that? Because our spiritual life comes through Torah. So it's called Eitz Chaim, Eitz HaChaim. Why is that Eitz Hadas? So the Alter Rebbe, if you look in the Geras HaKedah Siman Chavav 26, he cites a Zohar, Rai Mehemna, that says that Torah Shebiksav is Eitz HaChaim and Torah Shebal Peh is Eitz Hadas. Also, actually, let me correct myself. That's part of it. That Primis HaTorah is Eitz HaChaim, and Nigla the Torah, the revealed, is Eitz Hadas. Why? He explains, the Zohar says, because in Nigla, in Gemara, it deals with Tevirah, like the tree of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So the question obviously asks, what do you mean? Torah is good and evil? So the answer is no. Torah addresses good and evil. It talks about arguments, damages, nizikin. It talks about taina shel sheker. Reuven says so, Shimon says this. They can't both be right. So the Torah Shabbat Peh, is engaged with the affairs of this world of good and evil, and it's trying to clarify. That's what Torah does. Like we learned earlier with Nezikin, Rabbi Yehuda, a birur, what's right and what's wrong. What's kosher, what's not kosher. What's permitted, mutter, and what's asur, what's prohibited. What is pure, tahir, and what is tameh, what is impure. That's the whole Torah. Torah Shabbat Peh. Whereas the Pnimis HaTorah, the Zohar says, less about tamen v'lei machlekes. You don't have questions, you don't have arguments. The Pnimis HaTorah does not address the right and wrong and good and the moral choices and the morality and immorality of this world. Because Pnimis HaTorah is Eitz HaChaim. Eitz HaChaim deals only with life. And Eitz HaDas deals with the matters of right and wrong and good and evil. So he's saying Torah Shebiksav is like Pnimis HaTorah in this context. Even though you'll find in Torah Shebiksav, what do you mean? It talks about Isser and Heter and Tomei and Tahir. However, it's not talking about an halacha. It's not talking about an action. It's talking about conceptually. But Torah Shebiksav itself is completely beyond that. I think we're going to learn that more in detail. So that's what he says. That's Eitz HaChaim higher than Eitz HaDas. But we'll learn more about this to understand this better. So let's continue. The Gam Kishiyarda B'Hishtalshlus HaElemis Ma'atzmus Ein Sof. Actually, I think this should be another quote. I think I have to add an opening quote. And even when Torah Shebiksav comes down below, in Ishtalshus Elemis, from Atzmus Ein Sof, it descends to us down here below in this world. Ad Torah HaNiglis, Lanu Be'esi is the Torah Shebiksav, to the point that it becomes a Torah that is revealed to us in actual letters. When we have a Sefer Torah, or even a published Torah, it's actual letters of Torah Shebiksav, physical letters, so the Torah doesn't remain in an abstract spiritual state as it was before the Tzimtzum, or here in this context, Atzmi Sa'ir. It comes down below in Esis of Torah Shebiksav, Me'irim HaKodesh Elyon. Even there, it's still radiating from the Ohr Kodesh Elyon as it is above. Shekol Zen Nikra B'chinas Bitter the Ohr Yosher. That's why, of course, the Sefer Torah has a higher level of Kedusha than Torah Shebiksav, has a higher level of holiness than Torah Shebal Peh. And all this is called, in the language of Chassidus and Kabbalah, the Bitter of Ohr Yosher. So let's explain what that means. We've learned about Ohr Yosher and Ohr Chozer. Remember? Ohr Yosher means a direct light. Ohr Chozer means a refractive light, like reflecting from the bottom. The sun is the classic example of Ohr Yosher because it's a luminary that gives off lights, mashpia. And the moon is the classic example for Ohr Chozer because it reflects the light of the sun. So the bitter of Ohr Yosher means it's a light that's coming from above and it's doing the refinement, not from the bottom up, from the top down. And what's the process? That the Ohr of Torah, the light of Torah, its power and its energy descends from the top down. To radiate and illuminate every form of darkness and concealment that they should no longer conceal and cover. Simply put, and I'm using now language the Rebbe would very often use when he spoke on this topic. We live in a world on its own. It's a dark world. What does that mean? Doesn't mean dark physically, because obviously when the sun rises and the dawn breaks, the day has started and it's bright. But in clarity purposes, you look at the world, you cannot know what is right and what's wrong. There's a lot of confusion. Everything is shrouded in a type of spiritual, psychological, and emotional darkness. You look at somebody, can you know if they're friend or enemy? Friend or foe? Not necessarily. You could have people who are smiling to you and then they're backstabbers. because the physical world conceals its true significance, its true reality. That's what the Tzimtzum did. It's not like what you see is what you get. So that's why we have to study and discover and do due diligence. On a very basic level, you meet someone. You right away say, okay, I can marry this person. Not necessarily. You want to find out who they are. They may not be the right person for you. They might be very bad for you. Same thing in business. Do you go and become a partner or take an investor or become an investor in a business without without discovery, without due diligence? Of course not. Because the world is a dark world from a point of view of clarity, especially morality. And I don't think we need any proof. When you look around the world today, you can see what some people call darkness, other people call light. What some people call good, other people call evil, and so on. Comes the Torah, and it's called Torah Ohr. What is this role? It's like driving on a road that's a dark road. And you don't have headlights. You don't know where to turn, and actually can be quite dangerous. The Torah is an illuminating light. Hashem is telling us, here is how you find clarity in this world. And I'll give you the whole methodology, Hashem says. Not just going to tell you what's right and what's wrong. I'll teach you how to discover what's right and what's wrong. I'll teach you how to think, not just what to think. A methodology, a divine methodology to be able to determine what is healthy, what is unhealthy, what may appear good is not necessarily good, or the opposite may appear not so good, and actually it's very deep, and within it's very good. I'll teach you a direction in life. So when you go to a teacher, when you go to a mentor, someone you really trust, I'm not talking about people who are self-appointed, but people who really are really knowledgeable, experienced, sensitive. What are you really going for? You're going for clarity. That you give them a situation, it could be a thorny situation, complicated, many different opinions. How are you going to find clarity? So God blessed us with minds, but He also blessed us with the Torah. And the Torah helps train the mind to know how to think clearly and establish what is right, what is wrong. Try to work your way through all the different confusion and the different entanglements to find clarity. That's what Torah is. You go to a Rav for a shaila, with a question, or there's an argument between two people or two entities, the Rav's role is to use Torah and to find clarity. Remember, we learned about Einei Ha'eda. What were the leaders of the community called? Eyes. Why are they called eyes? Because that's what eyes do. They direct, they guide us. If you don't have eyes, you're walking in the dark, the blind leading the blind. Eyes shine, and with a light that directs the eyes can see where to go. Or to put it in, again, language from the Rebbe, you walk into a dark room, you don't know where the table is, where the chairs are, where the steps are. You turn on the light, nothing changed. The only thing that changes is you see what's what, and you see what belongs where. So the very thing that could have been something that could have hurt you now can be your asset, because you know these are steps. They're important to have, but when in the dark you can fall down the steps, God forbid. Or you can bump into an obstacle. So Torah Ohr essentially is a spiritual illuminating light, like the headlights, like a lighthouse, that shine in the cheshech v'helem. So Torah gives us that ability to find clarity in a dark world. And that's called birur of Ohr Yosher, because it's a light that's coming from above. It was given to us. Ohr Yosher, it goes mamayla lamata to illuminate kol cheshev v'helem shliyalim v'yaster klal. V'zeu chochma ilah. And this is the supernal, the higher wisdom. In contrast to Chochma down below, coming from above, Sheiredes lamata, that descends below, the Torah that comes down below, levared, to separate or clarify, ulahavdil, and levared is to let's say clarify, lahavdil, to separate, gam ben tevera, also between good and the opposite of good, shemipnei Ohr hazeh, hu mokim madrege de Ohr Atzmis meir umavik biyeser at shenitche kol cheshech mipanav. So even though it's a dark place, due to this light that's shining, which is a Ohr Atzmi, a core energy, a core light, irradiates and mavik and shines, b'yeser increasingly, to the point that it pushes aside, dispels all darkness before it. That's exactly what a light does. You know, when you're going in a dark road, there's headlights. If you think of it, that's so exactly that they're completely dispelling the darkness in front of you because the lights are shining. And this is due to the fact sheyesh b'chachma zu b'chinas bittul. He's going back to the initial reason. Why does Chochma of Torah have this? Because it's bittul. There's no yeshus in it. There's no ego. There's no self. It's completely dedicated selflessly and seamlessly to the source that it is illuminating. Because what is the role of Torah? Torah is not coming to tell you its opinion. It's telling you God's opinion. So the Torah is a transparent ohr that God is sending us. You want clarity. Here is clarity. So it's a level of bittul the ayin ummah, chochma koyachma, be'etzem betachlis, fundamentally a selfless and completely identityless entity. Shemetam zeh sheire ba ma'atzmius ein sof kenal. For that reason, there dwells the core of ein sof, as mentioned above, the previous paragraph actually. And that sums up pages 409 and 410 as I write, Amid Tov Tes Tov Yud, in the Mittler Rebbe's original mimer. So far we have one level of Ohr that radiates the Choshech. What is that? That is Ohr of Torah Shebiksav, Eitz HaChayim, bitter of Ohr Yosher, a light, a powerful light that we're given from above that helps us clarify and illuminate and dispel the confusion and darkness and that shrouds this world. Without this Ohr, we would not be able to find that clarity. And it's due to the fact that Torah is Chochma Koyachma, total bittul telekus. That's all it is. It doesn't have anything of its own. All it is an expression of the divine plan and the divine clarity, you can say.
Can you take a question?
Sometimes I'm tempted to say no, just to teach you some patience, like we had when we were chayzrim, where we just had to wait till the topic was finished. But go ahead.
All right. Well, I'll try to set up my hands next time. I'm confused here in this paragraph whether he's referring to Torah Shebiksav specifically or Torah generally, because he started out talking about Torah Shebiksav, which is the first line of this paragraph, but then the rest of a lot of the paragraph seems to refer to Torah Bichlal.
Well, if you would wait patiently, you'll see that he didn't get to the second level of Ohr.
Yeah,
so,
right. So he is here
let's see.
referring to Torah Shebiksav, yes?
That's what he says.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, but whatever. Yeah, again, it's Ohr
If the mimer
Yosher.
ended here, it would be an important question to answer. But since
Yeah.
it's not, you'll soon see the answer will come.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
By the way,
No.
a small, tiny question. How are you transcending Shura? You said dwells, but I'm not sure that's the literal interpretation. Last
I
line.
use the word dwell, share from the word hashra, like hashra sashchina. Yeah.
Okay.
I use the word dwell. There may be other words, but that word works.
Okay. What's the root, like in modern Hebrew?
Hashra.
Yeah.
Share.
Because dwell is
a very
like
common word. Hashra sashchina.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Manifest. Omnam.
That's probably a better word. Yeah, thank you.
Quote, Omnam. Hamadrega habezi is birchinas chochmet tatar the Torah shebal peh. The second level of Ohr that he referred to is called not chochmei law, higher chochma, it's called chochmet tatar, lower chochma, of the oral Torah. So now we have a second level. V'zeu shekosav chochmes bachutz truna. The pasuk says chochmes, plural, wisdoms, meaning more than one wisdom. Because it's referring to chochmei law ismasher b'chochma tata. This is probably quoting a Zohar, because the higher chochmais is nimshach, means it transmits into chochma tata. Shezeh masher chochma lo the Torah shebechsav meir b'chochma tata the Torah shebal peh. So chochmas b'chus tzuna literally means the wisdom will be lauded. B'chutz, meaning others will recognize and laud this wisdoms, but it means deeper. It means that the chochmei Allah of Torah shebiksav radiates and illuminates in chochma tata of Torah shebal peh. What he wants to bring out from this is that there are two levels of chochma. We'll soon get into what the difference is, but that there's two levels of chochma. Now we could already assume, based on what he said, that Torah shebal peh would be Eitz Hadas, in contrast to the Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life of Torah shebiksav. But I'll wait to read inside as we continue this discussion, because so far he hasn't said exactly what Torah shebal peh is in context of Torah shebiksav. Umamshich levayer, and Mittler Rebbe now continues to explain Hamayla nifla shel Torah shebal peh, the tremendous quality of the oral Torah. Because based on what we learned, you could just say, hey, you have Torah shebiksav, it covers all the ground. You have everything Hashem wants from us is in the written Torah. So what is Torah shebal peh coming to accomplish, to contribute? So you will know already the answer because we learned it in Ayin Beis. Keep in mind, Ayin Beis, which is based a lot on this mimer, remember Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud. And there we close. Mikra is Torah shebiksav. Mishnah and Talmud is Torah shebal peh, especially Talmud. So we learn that length, what the role of Torah shebal peh in contrast to Torah shebiksav is. But let's learn it first inside the Mittler Rebbe, and then we'll connect it back to Ayin Beis as well. So he's going to speak now the mile and the flow of Torah shebal peh, what he called chochma tata, a lower level of ohr, but one that comes down far lower and far more integrated into our system than Torah shebiksav. Because Torah shebiksav, for all its power, it still remains a ohr from above. And Torah shebal peh, as we'll learn, is engaged, first of all, our understanding of things, but it's also much more involved with the affairs of this world than Torah shebiksav is. So he explains now the mile and the flow of Torah shebal peh, the oral Torah, hameir es cheshach hatachten. Because remember, he said also earlier that there are two levels of cheshach. A cheshach, we'll soon learn, a cheshach ha'elyon, which is the Tzimtzum Arishin, and a cheshach hatachten, the cheshach of this world. So there's the darkness that God employs to conceal the divine energy to create existence, and then there's another level of darkness that allows for the confusion that we have in this world. Remember, Natzilus, which is also post-Tzimtzum, the cheshach ha'elyon effects, but not the cheshach hatachten. We'll learn more about this soon. I'm just reading as the Mittler Rebbe is developing it. So what is the mile and the flaw of Torah shebal peh that radiates and the cheshach hatachten down below? Quote, says the Mittler Rebbe, even though Torah shebal peh or chochma tata, where does it get its wisdom from? It's not self-generated. Torah shebal peh kom lekemida de arais lekemida de
lekemida.
What?
Lekemida de loy remizo by raison.
Lekemid, there's nothing in the oral Torah that's not hinted to in the written Torah. Menaha Nemila, the Amar Kra, everything in the oral Torah is based on the written Torah. So even though Chochma Tata receives from Chochmei Law, Yesh lo sherish gavoya ma'oid yeser mechochmei Law. Yet, it has a root that's far greater and higher than Chochmei Law itself. Acher habirur, after you find the clarity. In other words, before this clarity, obviously Chochmei Law is a more powerful ohr. But when Torah shebal peh does its work and you clarify a matter that was not clear, which is what Torah Shabbat Peh is, as we'll learn, and we have learned, its root, the ability to do that, is rooted in a place that's even higher than Chochma law. Before we even get reading it inside, let's just put it very simply put. If someone has clarity, God bless them, great. But imagine someone who's living in a life of confusion, with doubts and uncertainties. And they work hard, and even further, I'll go further. They've suffered pain. Not a life of total light and blessing. But they've come through it, and they've grown. So like we say, the mile of a Baal Tshuva over a tzaddik. Why? A Baal Tshuva is greater than a tzaddik per se? Not necessarily. But what he went through, his experiences, that brought him to a place that a tzaddik has never been to. Because he had to dig deeper. Not only was his thirst greater, but his resolution and his appreciation. And he discovered deeper levels of godliness that the tzaddik never had to find. Not because the tzaddik is missing something per se, the tzaddik was never challenged, never had to go there. Whereas the one that goes through darkness and through confusion comes to a place, that's higher, that's rooted higher. So you have to say that in Torah Shabbat Peh, Hashem embedded a resource, a power that's even greater than what he embedded in Torah Shabbat Ksav, because Torah Shabbat Ksav provides clarity from the top down. It's like shining a light. Torah Shabbat Peh allows us to go even into a place where there's no light and discover the truth. And this is a big part of what we learned in Ayin Beis when he talked about Torah Shabbat Peh. And in general, when you go through the Helam, it's a whole different experience than when you're going from Gili downward. So that is just a little summary of how he's going to explain Torah Shabbat Peh. But we'll read it inside, so we'll get all the details. Now keep in mind, we've learned this already. We learned it in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. Also interesting that the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, Amagbil Shabbos, he doesn't really address Torah Shabbat Ksav, Torah Shabbat Peh. I don't even think he alludes to it, to be honest. But the Mittler Rebbe is, because it, of course, going to help us understand the power of Torah Ohr, and ultimately its power over mitzvahs. Because remember the contrast here, Ner mitzvah and Torah Ohr. But we'll get to that. So let me just read. I'll try to go to the end of the paragraph and then stop for questions. So he made now a statement that even though Chochma Tatar receives from Chochma law, but it has Shedish Gavaya Me'ed Yeser, again, a root that's much higher than Chochma law Achar HaBirur, meaning after the clarification that Torah Shabbat provides. U'kamoshe Kosav, Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila. So this verse was brought as well in Ayin Beis. So the verse says, Eishes Chayil, woman of valor, Ateres Baila is the crown of her husband. What does that mean? The Isha initially is a Makabel. Malchus receives from Zah, from the Ish. But then she becomes the crown. A crown is Keser. It's higher than the Mashpia. The Mashpia is Zah. Or the Mashpia is Chochma and Bina. And it becomes Ateres Baila. The Isha becomes the crown. Meaning, because it's rooted higher. V'gam Isha be'etz Chaim. And this is a basis of the Ayin Beis that we learned at length. It also says in Eitz Chaim, the Talmud Bebriya, which is higher, Oila Lamaila Mishema the Chochma Lo the Torah Shebiksav. I'm sorry, I skipped. Umishna B'Yitzira, Umikra B'Asiyah. Mikra is Torah Shebiksav, it's an Asiyah. Where's Talmud? Torah Shabbat Peh in Briya. Hari Mikra Shu Torah Shebiksav Hu B'Asiyah B'Seif HaKol. So you see that Mikra, which is the written Torah, is Nasir, but the bottom, but Sefer Kel, but the last of all the levels. Now we learned in Ayin Beis that's because it's rooted also higher. We'll discuss that later. But practically speaking, Talmud is in Bria. Bria is higher than Nasir. The B'chinas Ban la'achar habirur. Remember the language Ma and Ban is another name for Ohr Yosher and Ohr Chozer. Mashpia, Makabel. So Ma is like Torah Shebiksav in this context, the light from above. But Ban, Torah Shebal Peh, La'acher Abirur, after the refinement of Ban, Oila Lamayla Mishem Ma de Chochma Lo de Torah Shebiksav. It elevates higher, like the Keser, higher than the Shema, the bittul of Chochma Lo of the written Torah. Ki b'chinas Chochma Tatar de Torah Shebal Peh, because this level, this is all a quote from the Mittler Rebbe, because this level of the lower Chochma in oral Torah, the oral Torah, hu b'chinas Halo de Ohr Chozer Mamata Lamayla, because it, in turn, is elevating from the darkness upward, from the bottom up, dafka, that's dafka that. Hari Eila lekadmuse mamish. So when it elevates all the way back to the source and even higher than anything that originated from. The kadmuse means literally to the primordial, original source code, if you wish. Shula atzmus hamoyer de ein sof atzmei. That's the atzmus hamoyer. He's saying moyer, not just oyer. The core moyer, the source of light, of ein sof itself. Shalamai legam b'chinas oyer, the Torah Kedesha. Moyer, of course, is the source of the oyer. So as high as Torah is a oyer atzmi, Torah Shebiksav, I should say, Torah Shebal Peh reaches the moyer from where the oyer of Torah Kedesha, of Torah Shebiksav originates from. End quote. That's Torah Shebal Peh. So little when we say also about Tshuva and Tzaddik, we say the same thing. When you do mitzvahs, it's Ratzon Elyon. When you do Tshuva, you reach Baal HaRatzon, the one who desires. Remember, the Ratzon is God's desire, but there's God who desires it. So that's one level higher than the desire itself. Okay. Now there's plenty more. The next good page or two is all going to be to explain this idea of Torah Shebal Peh. So you can read on your own. I mean, I'm going to learn it obviously in the next days, but right now I'm going to stop here, and I'll stop for any questions. But again, there may be some of your questions may be answered in the next few paragraphs.
So the idea of the Maila is because, like about Tshuva over at Tzaddik, right? That's why the Torah Shebal Peh.
I gave that example, but it's clear because you're getting, it says, a birur that is coming, that clarity in darkness is coming from a place that's even higher than the oyer of Torah Shebiksav, yeah?
Because B'chelo Yatir, that's, otherwise the
I know he didn't say the words B'chelo Yatir, and I don't want to use that expression. I don't think that's necessarily the case here. I think it's because you need more power, divine power, to clarify when there's darkness than when there's just to shine light is easier. Doesn't need as much from Atzmus as when you need to illuminate darkness. That sounds to me more the explanation here.
I thought people the Sheresh is Torah Shebiksav.
He said that clearly. Chochma Tata is rooted, just like Malchus is rooted in Zoh, but it's Eishes Chayil, Ateres Baila.
Which means in Torah Shebiksav there is like a pnimius of that, a deeper thing that is misgal in Torah Shebal Peh Dafka.
He said what he said. You're asking me what he's saying, or you asked me a question on what he's saying? That's exactly what he said. He just said those words. L'mayla gam b'chinas er de Torah Hagdesha.
I'm a
Sheidish gavoya ma'od yesem mechachmi la. Achar abirur, yeah. Was the first time you heard that the birur of Dira B'Tachtenim reaches deeper than all the higher levels of Elam Yisrael?
Okay, every time when you learn,
concept. It's a whole yesod of the all the Elam Yisrael where they learn Torah. Yafas sha'achas b'tshuva ma'asim tevim be'elam hazem b'kol chay elam haba. I'm not saying that's exactly what he's saying here, but the concept is not like a new concept that we achieve more in the transformation of the dark world than in all the Gili Elokus and Gili HaTeira and the Elam Yisrael. Here, the Chiddush is that it's Torah Shebal Peh in comparison to Torah Shebiksav, but the concept is a concept that I'm sure you've all heard and learned. Yeah.
I'm a little confused by the different. These are very high levels in any case of Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal Peh. The latter, you said, its root is higher than even Torah Shabbat, which is kind of what you just been talking about. But in the prior paragraph, he says literally Torah Shabbat Shashasho Ohr Atzmi the Ein Sof Mamish. B'kedusha Atzmus
Or,
the
but he
Ein
said
Sof.
it's or, and now he said Ma'or.
Oh, okay. Now I got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And as I said, he's going to explain more of this. So if you really want to really be able to fully understand, I would wait till we read the next few paragraphs. It's actually one more page that he's going to talk about, the next page primarily. Okay, good. And of course, it would be fascinating to know how the Rebbe Rashab, what he would have quoted, what he would have explained, what he would have said here. But so be it. We work with what we have. Okay, so we'll stop here. Next to last paragraph on page 17 in my essay. We'll stop here. And